In the shadows of military history, there are legends whispered in hushed tones among elite soldiers. Stories of warriors so skilled, so deadly, that their very names become weapons themselves. But what happens when such a legend walks into an ordinary weapons depot, appearing as nothing more than a young woman asking for equipment? What happens when those who judge by appearance alone fail to recognize the predator standing before them? This is the story of how mockery turned to terror, how laughter became silence, and how a simple mark on someone's wrist could change everything in an instant. Because some people aren't just soldiers. There's something far more dangerous. Something the military doesn't officially acknowledge exists. They called her Black Talon. And once you earned that name, you never truly left the shadows behind. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's weapons depot as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun unlocked the heavy steel doors. Another routine day of inventory, maintenance, and dealing with soldiers who thought they knew better than regulations. At 32, Chun had seen it all during his 8 years managing military equipment. Nothing surprised him anymore, so he thought. The depot's fluorescent lights buzzed to life, illuminating rows of carefully organized weapons racks, ammunition storage units, and tactical equipment. Everything had its place, and Chin took pride in maintaining the most organized armory on the base. His team of 4 specialists would arrive within the hour, but he always came early to review the day's requisitions and prepare for whatever challenges might arise. Chun was reviewing paperwork when he heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, he saw a young woman walking toward the depot entrance. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with shoulder-length dark hair and wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and worn leather boots. Nothing about her suggested military background, yet she moved with a purposeful stride that caught his attention. As she approached the counter, Chin noticed several things that didn't quite fit. Her posture was too straight, too controlled. Her eyes constantly scanned the environment, cataloging exits and potential threats with the unconscious efficiency of someone trained for combat. Most telling of all, despite her casual appearance, there was something about her presence that made the air feel charged with potential danger. "I need to requisition equipment," she said simply, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed at odds with her youthful appearance. Chin looked her up and down, noting the absence of any military identification or uniform. "Ma'am, this is a military weapons depot. Civilians aren't authorized to. I'm not a civilian." She reached into her back pocket and produced a set of credentials. The identification card was unlike anything Chun had seen before, black with silver lettering and a seal he didn't recognize. Chun examined the ID carefully. The name read Alexander Kane, but the designation field contained only a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to him. The issuing authority was listed as DoD classified, which told him absolutely nothing useful. "I'm sorry, but I can't verify this identification," Chun said, handing the card back. "I'll need to see standard military ID and proper requisition form signed by your commanding officer." Alexander's expression didn't change, but Chin caught a flash of something in her eyes. Not anger, but the kind of patience that suggested she'd dealt with this situation many times before. "Sergeant Chun," she said, reading his name tag. "I understand your position, but I need you to make a phone call. Contact your base commander and tell them Black Talon is requesting equipment authorization." The name meant nothing to Chun, but he noticed how Alexander said it, not as a call sign or nickname, but as if it were an official designation. Still, he had protocols to follow. "Ma'am, without proper authorization, I can't." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chen's team. Specialist Rodriguez, Corporal Williams, and Private First Class Johnson entered the depot, carrying coffee and engaging in their usual morning banter. They stopped short when they saw Alexandra standing at the counter. Well, Rodriguez said with a grin. "Looks like someone's lost. Miss, the visitor center is about 2 miles that way." He pointed toward the main gate, clearly amused by the situation. Williams joined in the mockery. Maybe she's here for the base tour. Sorry, sweetheart, but the weapons depot isn't on the public route. Johnson, the youngest of the group at barely 19, was more direct. Yeah, this isn't a museum. These are real weapons for real soldiers. Alexandra turned to face the three soldiers, her movement fluid and controlled. Chin noticed how she positioned herself to keep all of them in her field of vision while maintaining clear access to the exit. It was a tactical positioning that spoke of extensive combat training. "I'm here on official business," Alexander said calmly. "I need to speak with someone who has the authority to process classified requisitions." Rodriguez laughed outright. "Official business? Lady, you look like you should be serving coffee at the base cafe, not handling military equipment." "Maybe she's somebody's girlfriend," Williams added, trying to impress her soldier boyfriend by pretending to be tough. Johnson nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I've seen it before. Civilians think military life is all about the cool gear and action movies." Chen watched Alexander's reaction carefully. Most people faced with such open mockery would show signs of embarrassment, anger, or frustration. Alexandra showed none of these emotions. Instead, she remained perfectly still, her breathing steady, her expression neutral. It reminded Chun of the calm before storm. "Sergeant Chun," Alexander said without taking her eyes off the three specialists, "I'm going to ask you one more time to make that phone call. Contact your commanding officer and mention the name Black Talon. Tell them I need immediate equipment authorization." Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "Listen, princess, I don't know what fantasy you're living in, but this is the real military. We don't play dress-up or pretend games here." "Maybe we should call security," William suggested. "She might be some kind of spy or terrorist trying to get access to our weapons." The suggestion made Johnson nervous. "Should we detain her? I mean, if she's trying to infiltrate the base." Alexandra finally spoke, her voice carrying an edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. "You might want to reconsider your approach, gentlemen." Williams and Johnson immediately reached for their sidearms, but Alexandra raised her hands in a non-threatening gesture. "That's not necessary. I'm not here to fight. I just need equipment authorization." Chun stepped between Alexandra and his team, recognizing that the situation was rapidly escalating beyond his ability to control. "Everyone calm down. Miss Kane, I'm going to need you to step outside while I sort this out." "Sergeant," Alexandra said, her voice patient but firm, "please make that phone call. Ask for General Morrison if he's available. Use the name Black Talon. I guarantee you'll have authorization within 5 minutes." The mention of General Morrison's name gave Chin pause. Morrison was the base commander, a decorated veteran with 30 years of service. The idea that this young woman had direct access to him seemed impossible, but her confidence was unshakable. Rodriguez struggled to his feet, his pride wounded more than his wrist. "She assaulted me. We need to arrest her." "You reached for me first," Alexandra pointed out calmly. "I responded with minimal force to protect myself. Any security camera will confirm that." Williams kept his hand on his weapon. "I don't care what the cameras show. She's obviously dangerous." "Yes," Alexandra agreed simply. "I am." The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Most people would deny being dangerous or try to defuse the situation. Alexandra's matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her capabilities was somehow more unsettling than any threat could have been. Chen realized he was in over his head. Protocol demanded that he call security and have Alexandra removed from the premises. But something about her calm certainty made him hesitate. In his 8 years of managing the depot, he'd learned to read people. Alexandra wasn't bluffing or pretending. She genuinely believed she belonged here. "All right," Chin said finally. "I'll make the call. But you need to wait outside while I do it." Alexandra nodded. "That's acceptable. But, Sergeant, when you make that call, be specific. Tell them Black Talon is requesting immediate equipment authorization for a classified operation. Don't leave out any details." As Alexandra turned to leave, Rodriguez made one final attempt to salvage his wounded ego. "You can make all the phone calls you want, lady. There's no way someone like you has clearance for military equipment. You're probably just another wannabe trying to scam your way into the system." Alexandra paused at the doorway and looked back at him. For the first time since entering the depot, she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Specialist Rodriguez," she said, reading his name tag. "In about 3 minutes, Sergeant Chun is going to receive authorization that will make him treat me with the respect my position deserves. When that happens, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how quickly your assumptions led you into dangerous territory." She walked outside, leaving the 4 men alone in the depot. The silence that followed was heavy with tension and uncertainty. Rodriguez rubbed his wrist, still smarting from both the physical and psychological impact of the encounter. "She's bluffing. Has to be." Williams wasn't so sure. "Did you see how she moved? That wasn't self-defense class stuff. That was professional training." Johnson, ever the voice of inexperience, tried to process what he'd witnessed. "But she looks so young. How could someone that young have that kind of training?" Shin walked to his desk, staring at the phone. Every instinct told him to call security and have Alexandra removed. But her confidence, her specific knowledge of General Morrison, and her precise use of military terminology suggested there might be more to her story than met the eye. "Sergeant," Rodriguez said, "you're not seriously considering making that call, are you?" Shin picked up the phone. She knew the general's name. She knew specific protocol language. Either she's the most well-informed imposter I've ever met, or she's exactly who she claims to be. Outside the depot, Alexandra waited patiently, watching the base come alive with morning activity. Soldiers went about their routines, unaware that their entire perception of military hierarchy was about to be challenged. She'd been through this scenario dozens of times at different installations. The reactions were always the same: doubt, mockery, and eventually shock when the truth was revealed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Extraction in 72 hours. Equipment list attached. Maintain cover." Alexandra deleted the message and watched Chun through the depot window as he dialed the phone. In a few minutes, everything would change. The soldiers who had mocked her would learn that some people operated in shadows so deep that even their existence was classified. They would discover that Black Talon wasn't just a name. It was a legend that had walked among them unrecognized. The morning sun continued its climb across the sky, but for the men inside the weapons depot, the day had already taken a turn towards something far beyond their understanding. Chin's hand hovered over the phone for a moment longer before he dialed the base commander's office. The line rang twice before a crisp military voice answered. "General Morrison's office, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes speaking." "Colonel Hayes, this is Staff Sergeant Chun at Weapons Depot 7. I have a situation that requires the General's immediate attention." "What kind of situation, Sergeant?" Chun glanced toward the window where Alexandra waited, her posture relaxed but alert. "A woman claiming to be Black Talon is requesting equipment authorization. She says she needs to speak with General Morrison directly." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Chun wondered if the connection had been lost. When Hayes finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the routine bureaucratic tone, replaced by something that sounded like barely controlled urgency. "Did you say Black Talon?" "Yes, sir. She also mentioned classified operations, and—" "Sergeant Chun, listen to me very carefully," Hayes interrupted. "Do not let that individual leave the area. Do not question her further. Do not discuss this with anyone else. General Morrison will be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead, leaving Chun staring at the phone in confusion. In his 8 years at the depot, he'd never heard that level of intensity from Hayes, a man known for his unflappable demeanor. Rodriguez had been listening to Chin's side of the conversation with growing skepticism. What did they say? Are they sending security to remove her? "The general is coming here personally," Chin replied, still processing the implications. Williams laughed. "Yeah, right." He was followed by Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and another officer Chun didn't recognize, a stern-faced woman wearing colonel's insignia and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Alexandra straightened as she saw the convoy arrive, but showed no surprise at the military response her presence had triggered. Instead, she walked calmly toward General Morrison, her movements betraying none of the tension that filled the air around them. "General," Alexandra said with a slight nod of acknowledgement. Morrison's response shocked everyone within earshot. "Agent Kane, I wasn't expecting you back in operational status so soon." "Agent?" Chun felt his understanding of the situation crumble completely. Alexandra wasn't a civilian trying to scam equipment access. She wasn't a military wannabe or someone's girlfriend playing soldier. She was some kind of government agent with direct access to the base commander. "The timeline accelerated," Alexandra replied simply. "I need standard field kit plus specialized equipment for urban reconnaissance." The unidentified colonel stepped forward, her voice carrying obvious displeasure. "And what does she mean about preventing a terrorist attack?" Shin motioned for his team to stay quiet as Morrison approached the depot entrance. The base commander's presence transformed the atmosphere completely. What had been a routine morning at a weapons facility had become something that felt like a scene from a classified operation. "Sergeant Chun," Morrison said as he entered the depot, "I understand there was some confusion about Agent Kane's authorization." "Yes, sir," Chun replied, snapping to attention. "She presented identification I couldn't verify through normal channels." "That's because Agent Kane operates under classifications that don't exist in your verification system," Morrison explained. "Her clearance level exceeds that of most personnel on this base, including some of my own staff officers." Rodriguez, Williams, and Johnson exchanged glances of disbelief. The woman they'd been mocking and treating as a potential security threat had clearance levels higher than their commanding officers. Alexandra entered the depot behind Morrison, her demeanor now subtly different. The patient civilian who had endured their mockery was gone, replaced by someone who clearly belonged in the company of high-ranking military officials. "Sergeant Chun," she said, "I apologize for the confusion earlier. I prefer to handle requisitions quietly when possible, but sometimes circumstances require a more direct approach." "No apology necessary, Agent Kane," Chun replied, still struggling to process the dramatic shift in the situation. Colonel Reeves followed them into the depot, her displeasure evident in every line of her body. "General Morrison, I must protest this entire situation. Agent Kane's psychological evaluation is incomplete, and authorizing equipment for unsanctioned operations violates multiple protocols. The operation is sanctioned at the highest levels," Morrison replied firmly. "Agent Kane's psychological evaluation was completed yesterday, and she was cleared for immediate return to active duty." Alexandra smiled slightly at Reeves' obvious frustration. "Colonel, I understand your position, but we both know that some operations take priority over administrative procedures." The tension between the two women was palpable, suggesting a history of conflict that extended beyond the current situation. Chin got the impression that Alexandra's presence represented more than just an equipment requisition. It was part of a larger political struggle within the intelligence community. "What kind of equipment are we talking about?" Chin asked, trying to redirect the conversation toward practical matters. Alexandra produced a tablet from her jacket pocket and handed it to Chun. The device displayed a detailed equipment list that made his eyes widen in surprise. The requested items included advanced surveillance equipment, specialized weapons systems, and communication devices that he'd only heard about in classified briefings. "This is some serious hardware," Chin observed. "Most of this equipment requires special handling, and Agent Kane is qualified to handle all items on that list," Morrison interrupted. "She has certifications that exceed our standard requirements." Rodriguez couldn't contain himself any longer. "Sir, with respect, she doesn't look like someone who could handle advanced weapon systems." "I mean, no offense, but..." Alexandra turned to face Rodriguez directly, her expression neutral, but her eyes carrying a warning that made him immediately regret speaking up. "Specialist Rodriguez," Morrison said, his voice carrying a note of warning. Agent Kane's qualifications are not subject to your assessment. In fact, her training far exceeds anything you've experienced in your military career. Sir, I've been through advanced combat training, and have you been through SEER training at the advanced level? Alexandra asked quietly. Rodriguez nodded. Yes, ma'am. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training is standard for combat personnel. Which level? Level 2, ma'am. Alexandra's smile was cold. I instructed Level 4 SEER training before I was old enough to legally drink alcohol. I've completed survival courses in environments ranging from Arctic conditions to urban warfare zones. My weapons qualifications include systems you've never heard of, and my combat experience spans 3 continents. The casual way she delivered this information was somehow more impressive than if she'd been boastful about it. Rodriguez found himself believing every word, despite the cognitive dissonance of hearing such claims from someone who looked like she could be his younger sister. Williams, perhaps sensing that his colleague was digging himself deeper into trouble, tried a different approach. Agent Kane, we didn't mean any disrespect. It's just that we're not used to seeing classified operations personnel who look so young. Alexandra supplied. Well, yes, ma'am. Youth can be an advantage in certain operations, she explained patiently. People make assumptions based on appearance, as you've demonstrated this morning. Those assumptions can be useful for someone in my line of work. Colonel Reeves, who had been quietly fuming during the exchange, finally spoke up again. General Morrison, regardless of Agent Kane's qualifications, she should not be operating solo. The psychological evaluation indicated she has difficulty working with team members, and the psychological evaluation indicated that I work more effectively alone because I don't have to compensate for other people's limitations, Alexander corrected. There's a difference. Morrison held up his hand again, clearly growing tired of the ongoing dispute. Colonel Reeves, Agent Kane's operational methods are not up for debate. She's been given mission parameters, and she'll execute them according to her best judgment. Sir, what about oversight? Chain of command? Basic operational protocols? Agent Kane operates under different protocols than standard military personnel, Morrison replied. Her mission authority comes directly from Washington, and my role is simply to provide logistical support. Chun finished reviewing the equipment list and looked up at Morrison. Sir, I can have everything prepared within an hour. Some of the specialized items will need to be retrieved from our secure storage facility. Excellent, Morrison said. Agent Kane, will you need transportation to your operational area? Already arranged, she replied. I just need the equipment, and I'll be on my way. As the discussion continued, Chin noticed that his team members were processing the morning's events with varying degrees of success. Johnson looked like he was still trying to figure out what had happened, while Williams appeared to be reassessing every assumption he'd made about military operations and personnel. Rodriguez, meanwhile, seemed to be experiencing something approaching existential crisis as he grappled with how completely wrong he'd been about Alexandra. The truth was slowly sinking in for all of them. They had encountered someone operating at levels of the military and intelligence communities that they'd never imagined existed. Alexandra Kane, or Agent Kane, or Black Talon, whatever her true designation might be, represented a world of classified operations and shadow missions that existed parallel to the conventional military they knew and understood. Outside the depot, the security perimeter maintained by Morrison's escort created an air of unreality around the entire situation. Other personnel on the base had begun to notice the unusual activity, but the presence of armed guards kept curious onlookers at a distance. Alexandra checked her watch, a movement that somehow conveyed urgency without appearing rushed. General, if the equipment can be ready within the hour, I'd like to begin mission preparations immediately. Of course, Morrison agreed. Sergeant Chun will personally oversee the preparation of your equipment. As the group began to organize the logistics of Alexandra's equipment request, Chin couldn't help but wonder what kind of mission required such an eclectic mix of surveillance gear, weapons, and communication equipment. Whatever it was, the urgency surrounding it suggested that Liz might depend on its success. The morning that had begun with routine mockery and dismissal was rapidly transforming into something that would be remembered and discussed by everyone present for the rest of their careers. They had been given a glimpse into a world where young women could be legendary operatives, where equipment requests came with presidential authority, and where their understanding of military hierarchy was merely the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. While Chun organized the equipment preparation, Alexandra stepped outside to take a phone call, leaving the depot staff to process what they'd witnessed. The conversation between Morrison and Colonel Reeves continued in hushed but intense tones near the weapons storage area. Rodriguez approached Chun hesitantly, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "Sergeant, what just happened here? I mean, who is she really?" Chun paused in his inventory checklist, considering how much he should share with his team. The morning's events had clearly exceeded their security clearance levels, but they'd been witnesses to everything that transpired. "Specialist, I'm not entirely sure myself," Chun admitted, "but it's clear that Agent Kane operates at levels we don't normally interact with." Williams joined the conversation, keeping his voice low. "Did you hear what she said about instructing SEER training? Level 4 doesn't even exist in our manuals. Maybe there are levels of military operations we don't know about," Johnson suggested, his youthful naivety making him more adaptable to the situation than his colleagues. Through the depot window, they could see Alexandra pacing slowly as she spoke on her phone. Even in casual conversation, her movements suggested constant awareness of her surroundings. She occasionally glanced toward the depot, but her attention seemed focused on potential threats from other directions. Colonel Reeves' voice carried across the depot as her argument with Morrison intensified. "General, Agent Kane's psychological profile indicates significant trauma from her last assignment. Returning her to operational status without proper counseling is irresponsible." "Colonel," Morrison replied patiently, "Agent Kane's psychological evaluation was conducted by specialists who understand her particular type of work. Your concerns, while well-intentioned, are based on incomplete information. What kind of work requires someone so young to accumulate the level of trauma indicated in her file?" Morrison's expression grew grave.